You are listening to a Clarkesworld Magazine podcast with your host and narrator, Kate Baker. Greetings, Clarkesworld citizens. I hope this podcast finds you extraordinarily well. This is our 6th story for the month of September 2020, issue 168. Have you liked what you heard all the way up to this one? Please consider throwing us some support over at patreon.com/Clarkesworld, where you can be a part of the magazine each and every month. So our story is titled Every Plumage, Every Beak, and is by Nin Harris. Nin Harris is an author, poet, critical theorist, and Gothic scholar who exists in a perpetual state of unheimlich. Nin writes Gothic fiction, Baroque planetary romances and space operas, mythic fantasies, and various other forms of hyphenated weird fiction. Nin's publishing credits include Clarkesworld, Strange Horizons, The Dark, Beneath Ceaseless Skies. Nin was a 2016 Riesling Poetry Award nominee and can be found at mythopoetica.com. Her most recent stories in Clarkesworld include August 2017, Reversion, April 2018, Violets on the Tongue, and March 2019, Dreams Strung Like Pearls Between War and Peace. So my dear listeners, I hope you can sit back, relax, and let me tell you a story. In a secret, saturated forest that nestled between worlds, Sung Dao's people were the tamest of the monsters that terrorized the long nights. It was not just the Garuda army that frightened the young Kinari. The watching trees were populated with tree demons and vengeful fanged owl women who loved the sweet flavor of Kinari blood. Sung Dao's clawed avian feet scrambled the undergrowth of Solase, Pagaga, and Don Kisum. Sound assaulted her as much as fear. The croak of a toad nearly rendered her to tears. She wanted more than anything to be home in her family's thatched hut that was built where the herbs grew sweet and crumbly soil rich with minerals and worms. Sung Dao reached the half-circle of wooden houses on stilts set up right before the ruins with a sob of relief. The front doors of the houses were accessed through wooden ladders that only agile human feet could climb. An apsara perched on the edge of one of those doorways, her naked feet firmly braced upon the wooden steps. She was busy at work repairing a winnowing machine. The apsara looked up eagerly at Sung Dao's approach. "Sung Dao? What news?" Sung Dao said, "The forest is busy tonight, Tima. You know what happened to us last night. The Kanyangan troops were mobilizing not just the one Garuda. It was troop of Garudas, all fierce and proud. Their plumage was in brilliant hues. So brilliant." Sung Dao looked down, eyeing her own subdued feathers with a critical eye. "Never mind that," Tima said with some impatience. "How many of them were there?" 60 of them? The owl women were there with their feathers newly preened and their eyes hungry for blood. I saw one of the Bunyan lieutenants talking to them. I think one of the Garuda saw me, but I did not stay to be sure," Sung Dao answered. Tima got to her feet. Using the butt end of her rifle to steady herself, she climbed down from the house. She favored her sore ankle that was twisted from their misadventure of the previous night. "They will be dancing again tonight." Tima's eyes were alight with avaricious excitement. "Perhaps we should have another look. The change we noticed in their dance last night may have something to do with the increase of Garudas. Perhaps it is a new war dance." "If it is a war dance, we should not be going, Tima," Sung Dao said. She hated that she automatically took on the tone of a nursemaid, but the truth was that she had been one for many years. Sung Dao kept to this promise even when she would rather not. It was how she honored the memory of her mother. "Oh, you're such a fusspot, Sung Dao. It'll be fine. Here, take this. I've repaired our goggles," Tima said as she reached into the pocket belt she always wore over her sarong and brought out a slender pair of aquamarine goggles. Sung Dao took the goggles from Tima's hand and positioned them above her bangs as usual. "They will not like it if they catch us at it again. It was bad enough last night, Tima." They sounded so angry. I've never heard music that angry before. I will bring my rifle, Tima said now, but she sounded unsure. We should not shoot at them. It would be disrespectful, Sung Dao said in her soft, anxious voice. She tucked a lock of her thick jet-black hair behind her right ear before continuing. Besides, I do not think that shooting will work, not with them. They own this forest. What are we to them but worms to be stepped upon? Tima frowned, barely paying attention to what Sung Dao was saying. Wait here, she said. When Tima used that tone of voice, Sung Dao was too afraid to disagree. She hated that fear. She often hated how subservient she was, but it was never something she voiced. Tima had been her charge and now her friend. She cared for Tima. That emotion did nothing to dilute her slow, bubbling resentment. Sung Dao paced the ground before Tima's hut, remembering the moment when she was sure the Garuda had looked straight at her. She shivered at the thought of what might have happened to her, alone out there in the forest. She had felt her life in mortal peril like never before that night, and that caused the slow simmer of resentment against Tima's continuous demands to escalate to dangerous, bubbling hot liquid anger. She felt it, and she breathed in her rage, terrified at the emotions that filled her. They were alien to her, but then she had never been in mortal peril before. Sung Dao wondered if this was how Tima's mother had convinced her mother to take part in the border skirmish with the humans before they had died in battle. Anger, thick and exhilarating, filled her with a new determination, caused her thoughts to race in the moments when she was left alone. Across the clearing in the moonlight, 3 young girls were playing with stones and squares drawn in the sand. They hopped from square to square on one leg, often shrieking in laughter when one of them stumbled and fell down on the red earth of the clearing, then recovering with the agility of the young. Another Apsara was repairing a scooter, also stolen from humans, and augmented with parts scavenged from the buried kingdom. The night wind was cold. It was another sign that the Bunyan were close. She could almost feel the music that they made, still lacing her bloodstream and sending a chill piercing through her bones. Sung Dao and Tima had both been transfixed by the music that night. So alien, so much more precise than the elegant, precise measure of the melodies usually played by the court musicians of the Bunyan princesses. Soon, the wooden vehicles would arrive. The communal clearing would be empty long before the Bunyan princesses performed their pre-landing ritual of aerial dances. It was not a sight that they were supposed to see. Sung Dao cocked her head to one side as a woman called out from inside the lighted house, close to the 3 girls. The clearing between Tima's village and Sung Dao's colony grew deserted. Doors and windows would be locked up and barred. Sung Dao should be with her family too. Tima approached with a rifle in one hand and a silver spear in another. Where did you get that? Sung Dao asked. Kinanga gave it to me. It's one of theirs. They will accuse us of stealing. They won't know. This thing will make us invisible to them, but we must be joined. Sung Dao's anger was beginning to show on her face. She narrowed her eyes at Tima and spoke in very slow, measured tones. We are not children anymore, Tima. I'm sorry, but you're not light anymore. I wasn't going to mount you, Sung Dao, Tima said airily, oblivious to Sung Dao's rage. Tima beckoned at Sung Dao to follow her. The hibiscus bushes grew thick next to the clothesline Tima had constructed between 2 mango trees. Tima pulled out a brass vehicle from behind the bushes. Sung Dao was engulfed by a nausea so intense that she had to look away in order to contain her gag reflex. The slit-eyed glance that she threw Tima would have been terrifying for its utter lack of warmth, had the Apsara not been blithely aware. It's a chariot? Sung Dao asked. Tima nodded, glee written on her face. It's a chariot? Sung Dao asked again. Tima's eyes twinkled with unrepressed glee. Isn't it glorious? Here's how it will work. I'll attach this to you, and then you pull us into the forest. It's a 1-person war chariot made for your people. Tima was blithely unaware of what Sung Dao was going through, nor the extent to which she had overreached, but she was not long unadvised of her friend's emotional state. "I pull you into the forest, Tima. Isn't that what you mean? I am not your beast of burden." Sung Dao's usual soft-spoken voice grew harsh. Her soft and feminine features were convulsed with rage. Tima gaped at her, confused and finally frightened. "I'm sorry, I meant no harm, Sung Dao." "You never do, Tima. Do you even know the history of that torture machine that you plan to attach to me? Do you even bother to ask?" Sung Dao looked at her best friend with eyes that had changed. Tima shivered, now no longer oblivious to Sung Dao's rage, made more terrifying because her words came slow, soft, and clipped. "I'm sorry, Sung Dao. I should have asked you first, but I thought it would be..." "I don't care what you thought. You never think these things through, Tima." Sung Dao looked away, saying, "I'm done. You'll have to go on without me." The Kinori returned to her family's colony, her back straight and her clawed feet almost attacking the ground she trod upon. She had managed to bank down the impulse to go berserk, but she knew it would one day transform her. She had seen it happen in her mother and in her aunts. Tima stumbled into the woods, still in shock from Sung Dao's anger. Tima had found the chariot in the shed where they stored all of the artifacts from the buried kingdom. Tima should have thought about it, about what it had done to the Kinari, and how it would have felt to be treated like a beast of burden. But she wanted them both to be invisible, and they could only be invisible if they were connected to each other somehow. Tima now understood that for Sung Dao, the chariot represented the subjugation and torture of her kind, a fettering of who they were, an exploitation of their powers. The people of the buried kingdom had similarly ensnared the Apsaras, harnessing their powers to create a kingdom that nestled half in the world of men, half in the world of Apsaras, hidden from danger from both worlds, until one of the kings dared too far and dared to attempt a capture of a princess from Kanyangan. Tima should have remembered the extent to which both of their people had been enslaved. She was severely disappointed in herself. Tima sneaked into the forest, clutching the silver spear in one hand. The rifle was slung along her side, slapping slightly against her form. She wore a sarong with a wide leather belt that held ammunition for her rifle, various knives and small packets of spell herbs for protection. She wore stones as talismans around her neck, strung together with string, and slippers made from treated tree bark. Finally, she attached her modified goggles in order to see the celestial princesses better. The princesses who floated down from the flying vehicles were always dressed differently. One night, they would be resplendent, more like goddesses in gleaming silver. The next night, they would be ethereal dancers in wispy robes of lilac. They sang as they hunted. They were both extremely feminine in a way that Tima envied, but also extremely fierce. Tima sucked on her lower lip as she watched, willing herself neither to move nor to breathe too loud. She was invisible to them so long as she held on to the silver spear, and so she clutched it in a death grip. What she did not know, however, was naturally the one thing that she should have known. She was invisible to the princesses, but not to their pets, their guardians. The Garuda of the celestial princesses of Kanyangan were larger than the colorful birds of paradise that could be found in the forest, the elegant and shy Sendera Washi. Tima craned her neck, noticing that the Garuda were now armored and wore curious goggles she had never seen before, large and spiked at the edges. Tima had no warning at all this time. Quieter than breath, a beak pulled her out of her hiding place, lodging itself in her cotton bashu. Thankfully not puncturing her skin, she dropped her spear and shrieked. Before remembering she was supposed to be quiet, she shrieked again as the Garuda flew up into the sky, hauling her along. Her sisters wanted to know why she was so upset. Sung Dao ignored everyone, slinking to the corner of their hut to stare at the thatched wall. She did not join them for dinner, even though the scent of the glutinous rice, spiced fish, and the mangoes that she had plucked from the trees earlier in the day filled the hut. She ignored her sisters further as they danced menorah after dinner, practicing for the harvest pageant of propitiation. Her silence was of a sort that infected the others, and they finally settled down to talk quietly amongst themselves, their tail feathers comfortably settled against the soft earthen floor. Finally, her eldest sister, Young-yu, sat down beside her. "What happened, Sung-tao? Have you fought with Tima? She found one of those war chariots. She wanted me to harness myself up so that she could ride me." Sung-tao's tones were soft so that only Young-yu could hear her. Young-yu craned her elegant neck to look at her youngest sister. "What she did was wrong, Sung-tao. You were right to be angry, but was she aware about what it means to our people? Did she know those chariots were instruments of shame and torture?" "Tima was thoughtless as usual. She only had to care about how we would get to see them. She only had to care about herself, as usual." "The Bunyan?" "Yes." Young-yu shook her head. "No good will come of her obsession with those folk. They are woven of a thread far finer than our own rude form." "I know that, but she's gone anyway, says we are all descended from them, and she means to learn more about our kinship." Young-yu gave her sister a deliberate look. "Let me understand this. You let the girl you call your oath sister go into the forest alone to spy on the Bunyan princesses, when you know she's obsessed with them?" "She brought that war chariot out. She wanted me to comply with an act that has caused shame and dishonor to our kind for centuries." "I know. It was a terrible thing to have done, and very thoughtless of her. Still, do you want something bad to happen to Tima? Really? Of the sort that may happen to her if the Garudas capture her?" Sung-tao sighed and said reluctantly, "No, not really." "So come on then, you can go ahead with considering her unforgivable after we've fished her out of whatever scrape she's got herself into. You got just cause, don't get me wrong, but we can't let her die. Our mother promised her mother, remember?" "What makes you assume she's in trouble?" Sung-tao countered. "You're not with her, and she's got artifacts she should not be anywhere near. And we both know what Tima can be like." Sung-tao shook her head and groaned. "Oh, do we have to do this?" she asked in plaintive tones. "Yes, Sung-tao, we really do." "I don't like coming here," Sung-tao said to Young-yu the next day as they entered the ruins of the buried kingdoms. "Well, most of us do make our livelihoods from scavenging these ruins, sister. You are now old enough to do the same." Young-yu beckoned at her to take a left as they entered a winding road almost covered by giant ferns. "However, that is not why I've brought you today." Young-yu pointed at a thatched hut that looked far more spacious than the hut they shared with their siblings. The thatching looked new and elegant. "Did you build this?" "Yes, very slowly I did. Come inside, I want to show you what I found." Sung-tao followed Young-yu into the hut, which was spacious enough on the inside that Sung-tao considered that they should be calling it a house. That was strange enough. Houses were not normal for their people. They were too used to needing to build homes they could quickly dismantle and carry on their broad backs. Building this thatched house with the grounds of the buried kingdom was even more terrified, Sung-tao thought. Young-yu lifted what looked like a huge frame off the ground. "What is that?" Sung-tao asked. "It is a war kite, used to fire missiles into enemy troops. The kinori used to be deployed in the armies of the buried kingdom for that purpose. But there are other uses for these kites." "Such as?" "Well, haven't you ever wondered what it would feel like to fly?" Young-yu asked her. Sung-tao almost flinched. "Not you too," she said, tucking her hair behind her ear in a nervous gesture. "My obsession with flight is not the same as your friend's. I'm thinking about ways in which we should be able to defend ourselves. and flight is one way. I've managed to work out how to get it to work. Take this." Sung Dao took the war kite that her sister held out to her, and then watched as Young Yu picked up a huge satchel and another war kite. Both war kites were enormous and had harnesses attached to them. Sung Dao nearly staggered under the kite she held, but it was not so much because it was heavy, for it was definitely incredibly light. But the sheer length and width of the wings made the entire contraption difficult to carry. "Let's go outside so we can get this to work," Young Yu said. "But why?" "Well, so we can find your friend." "You just want an excuse to use your new toys. You're just as bad as her," Sung Dao said. "What about the fact that you want us harnessed into these kites in the same way we were harnessed into those chariots?" "It's different, Sung Dao. I've changed these kites. They weren't originally used for flying, but the Kinori would run with these kites on the ground to aim weapons at the enemy. But look, I've turned them into something that can make us fly." Young Yu worked as she spoke, pulling straps and other bits of scavenged leather out from her satchel, attaching hooks and strange brass buttons and other bits of leather in crisscross pattern. "What are you doing?" Sung Dao asked. "Attaching the harness to the war kites to carry us. Patience, sister." Young Yu had her sister sitting down on a boulder before she strapped her into a harness, which was then attached to the giant violet-hued war kite. Young Yu's excitement was infectious, and Sung Dao began to feel a measure of skeptical enthusiasm. "How do you expect these kites to carry us?" she asked. "We have never been able to fly because we are so dense." "The same way. They used to carry huge weapons of war, except better. Look." Young Yu passed a rolled-up piece of paper to Sung Dao, who stared at the illustrations they contained. "Your friend's people aren't the only one who can make machinery out of what they've scavenged from these ruins, you know. I just never thought we needed to do so, and why use the weapons and designs of our oppressors? Well, there will come a time where we do not need to do what we are doing right now, sister. We work with what we have. We scavenge because we were robbed. Now be brave. The next bit may sound alarming. Stand up, please, in the clearing over here." Young Yu attached what looked like a smaller leather satchel to her war kite. Taking out a blowtorch, Young Yu started turning a dial on the satchel before attaching the blowtorch to a nozzle that jutted out from the satchel. A long jet of flame emerged from the nozzle. The satchel expanded, and a great force suddenly moved the war kite upward. "Just remember to keep your limbs relaxed and stay calm. Also, take this." Sung Dao deftly caught the revved-up rifle that Young Yu threw at her and tried to remember to stay calm. It was not easy to do so, given that she was the most easily frightened of all her sisters. Young Yu's war kite was bigger than Tima's. The satchel, with its strange properties of fire and force, was also bigger. She held in her hand a large rifle that also seemed equipped with a silver spear. "I'm calling them propulsion satchels," Young Yu said, winking at the question in her sister's face. She pulled Sung Dao closer, attaching Sung Dao's harness to her own harness with a strong woven rope. "There's a smaller, silver spear attached to the inside of your rifle. Do you remember how to shoot that thing?" she asked, giving Sung Dao a cheeky grin. Sung Dao snorted, being the sibling who was the most adept at hunting despite her nervous tendencies. "You know I do, but do we have to resort to violence?" "Hopefully not, but it is good to be prepared." "Come on, Sung Dao. We shouldn't waste time." Young Yu pulled down her goggles to cover her eyes, and Sung Dao did the same for her own pair. The Empress's wooden palace in the sky was the largest amongst all of the floating palaces, and naturally the grandest. Gold inlaid every wood-carved detail of her palace, and the ladders were studded with rubies and chalcedony. The Empress herself sat on a throne that was set so high in the throne room that 36 steps curved upward to meet her feet, clad in slippers of gold and jade. Tima gazed upon the Empress in awe, wondering if this was the last sight of grandeur she would be granted before they ended her sad life. If so, she was glad to die, she thought. Her dearest wish had been fulfilled. The Empress laughed, and it was not a kind sound. I'm assuming this is one of the little spies who keep returning to watch us. Of what race is this one, First Admiral? First Admiral was a woman dressed in a simple outfit of teal cotton trimmed with silver and teal sonket. She circled the kneeling Timma and then answered. Of Malay Thai extraction, descended from the Apsaras of the Buried Kingdom, she is one of our very distant kin, Your Imperial Majesty. One of the little ones we rescued from those accursed kings. Yes, Your Imperial Majesty. They know our rules, and they know the price of our rules. She was caught spying. Shall we behead her, or shall we claim her as tithe? Timma bit down hard on her lower lip so as not to embarrass herself with pleas. First Admiral paused to look down at her. Well, she is not without competence, this one, Your Imperial Majesty. We may be in need of more tinkerers in the time to come. The Empress exhaled. It was a long, tired sound. You think we have come to this? Recruiting human tinkers. It's worth a try, Your Majesty. We need to protect our palaces beyond what we've been doing. The Empire of the Air grows larger, and our people are no longer united as they once were. Curiosity overcame Timma despite her fear. She asked, Your Imperial Majesty, I'm not fit to kiss the ground beneath your dais, let alone breathe the air you breathe, let alone speak, but may I know why the Bunyan are at war? The Empress laughed again. This time, a sound of shocked amusement. So, not fit to breathe the air we breathe, but daring to question our actions, so very insincere, little one. First Admiral glanced at Timma before looking up at the Empress. Your Imperial Majesty, perhaps it would be good if her folk knew what is going on. This impacts them as well. They are, after all, our kin. The Empress made a dismissive gesture with her hand. Tell her, then, it makes no difference what these deluded byblows know. First Admiral bowed in graceful and profound respect. We are not at war, little Apsara, but there is a battle happening to determine which of the princesses will be the next Empress. Timma did not understand. The Empress barely looked older than Timma. The Empress met her eyes, a small smile playing about her regal lips. We do not serve as Empress forever, little Apsara. After every decade, a contest happens to determine who serves next. This year, things have become rather strained. Her Imperial Majesty's daughter won the contest this year. The other princesses claim it was foul play because an engineer died during the contest. They have now mobilized in opposing camps to determine the next Empress, First Admiral said. Timma looked up at the Empress, suddenly realizing that the Empress was very possibly on the losing side of this battle. Why would they call foul? The Empress shrugged. It was a technicality. It's not the first time such a thing has happened in our history, not the first time an engineer has died, even. The violence with which these claims were made, however, is something new. We are growing more dependent on engineering. There was a time where we lived only on the power of Sakti, but our connection to Sakti grows weak. The world outside of Kanyankan grows stronger. Your Imperial Majesty, this unworthy being would be pleased to serve and help you in any way at all in this battle. The Empress shook her head slightly, frowning. What can you do, little Apsara? You are but a tinker. Timma was about to answer when a commotion broke out. She turned to look and saw 6 armed women bring forth Sangdao and Yongyo. They were harnessed to enormous kites that were dragging behind them. They struggled, their faces red and their necks expanding in an alarming way. The sisters tried repeatedly to claw at the eyes of the Bunyan guards who First Apsaras and now the Kinnari. Are we to have the entire raggle-taggle survivors of the Buried Kingdom up here in my throne room? Captain Misha, what is the meaning of this? We found these 2 Kinnari harnessed to armed war kites that flew faster than our Garuda, Your Imperial Majesty. We managed to overtake them when the wind slowed just before their machines died. The propulsion satchels lost power as we gained altitude, Yongyo said to no one in particular. sounding incredibly disgruntled. "Kinnery mechanics and Aspera tinkers," the Empress said, her tone thoughtful. "I'm going to need help to understand how such a strange event can come to pass. It is an anomaly, but it may be fortuitous." The Empress's thoughtful tone came hand in hand with a shining luminescence in her form, which grew until she was an oval of light that hurt the eyes. Tima immediately turned the dial on her goggles to compensate for the light blindness. She gasped at what she saw. The oval of light seemed to split itself. A bird that seemed to be made of both air and light emerged from the Empress's form. It floated above the Empress in a delicate way, its movements soft and deliberate. The peace it brought filled everyone in the room. "Holy Gentayu," the Empress said in soft, reverent tone. "Holy Gentayu," the Empress said in a soft, reverent voice. "Give us guidance in this matter. Should we take these children as tithe, or should we sacrifice them?" The bird flew down from the throne, coming face to face with Tima. The bird was so beautiful that Tima could not bear to look full into the soft brown eyes that fiercely looked into hers. The bird then flew above her, almost gliding in the air before it reached the two Kinnery sisters circling them. Tima did not understand the ways of the Kinnery, but she knew she had angered and hurt Sangdao. She wondered if the Gentayu would know of this. If so, would she be punished? The Gentayu flew back to the Empress. The two of them merged in a brilliant ball of blue light that hurt Tima's eyes even through her light blindness setting. She closed her eyes and kept them closed. It felt like a very long while before the Empress spoke. The entire room had descended into a reverent silence. It felt as though even the air had been sleeping until the Empress's voice woke them up again. "You, too, Kinnery, come closer. Tell me of how you changed these war kites." "I found close to 200 war kites in one of the armories in the Buried Kingdom, Your Imperial Majesty. I took 2 of them to work on. I also found the old engineering rooms of the Buried Kingdoms, where they combined minerals and gases to create fluids that could move objects across space. There were many diagrams in the engineering archives that gave instructions. I merely connected that design to the design of the war kites, so that I could fly," Young Yu said, obviously trying to sound nonchalant. However, her eyes were almost shining with the pleasure of sharing what she had achieved. "That was very ingenious of you, young Kinnery. However, it is clear that your mechanical work needs refining. You had the speed, but not the lasting power. The lasting power is that of Sakti, which has been keeping our palaces afloat." The Empress's expression was inscrutable as she continued. "However, as Sakti grows weak, technology must grow strong and evolve. These 3 denizens of the villages below will be useful in my daughter's battle." First Admiral nodded, her eyes pleased at the Empress's decision. Tima slumped in relief. On her throne, the Empress surveyed her court with troubled eyes. She spoke. "The Gentayu also said that we must consider these Apsaras and Kinnery as potential candidates for our future armies. She says that we must unite against a common danger in the future. We cannot merely be a city of Bunyan any longer. As the world outside of our kingdoms grows, our forests and our dominions will decrease. We will need to fortify ourselves." Tima wondered what that common danger could be, but she was too overcome with relief to dwell too long on the subject, too overcome to notice the sounds of anger and conflict that swept over close 200 Bunyan that thronged the huge throne room in the sky. "Take them away to be outfitted and trained. I am weary and must retire," said the Empress. Tima stood up and made to run towards Sangdao. She stopped mid-stride at the cold look Sangdao gave her. Sangdao shook her head and turned away, the 2 sisters left with the armored guards. Tima did not even bother to deny the hollow feeling within her. It was a feeling that would be her constant companion until the end of her days. First Admiral had placed both the Kinnery with an aerial defense engineering unit to be trained, while taking Tima to the floating annex for civilian engineers. One of the pavilions had been converted into a practical workshop, filled with Bunion engineers, their elegant limbs encased in overalls made of cane pelicat. This is where we work on refining our machines, merging the powers of the elements to create new war engines and ways to keep our city afloat and invisible, First Admiral said. We are trying our best to develop new technology to keep the palaces not just afloat, but to keep them hidden. I do not know how I will ever be useful to beings so much more intelligent than me, Tima said, self-conscious and shy. She was overcome with the brilliance and competence displayed by the Bunion's engineers at work. Her eyes hungered for the machines they were building. You are here to learn. You are not useful to us yet, but you will be, First Admiral said. Her voice was not unkind. The Empress always looks further into the future than any of us. This is what happens when you are connected to the holy Shintayu. Am I not here to help with the battle between the Empress's daughter and the other princesses? Oh, that battle was lost before it began, child. Our story is about to change. Yours is only just beginning. Learn, for you will be the future of this empire. All of you. Their food was served on bronze platters so grand that the two Kinari were shy. Your harness has brought us to a different world, sister, Sung Dao said to Yonggyo as they were fed piles of glutinous rice with shredded mango salad. Yes, my harness worked, but there is too much to be done before the war kites can be made useful in battle. I have much to do with the aerial defense engineering unit. Sung Dao looked happier and calmer than she had been for a very long time. Nevertheless, her eyes seemed uncertain. Will you teach me, sister? I want to help. I am not smart like you, but I can do what needs to be done. Yonggyo laughed. Not smart, Sung Dao. You always think less of yourself than you deserve. Perhaps asking you to be Tima's nursemaid was not one of Mother's better decisions. You may as well prove to be the smartest of us all, Sung Dao. This is a whole new world for us. Sung Dao nodded her assent, staring at the clouds from the open doors of their floating pavilion. During their flight in the sky moments before they were apprehended, Sung Dao had seen the world stretched out before her and felt the rush of knowing instinctively how to keep the propulsion satchel going. She felt as though the hot rage that had engulfed her had transformed her into a different person. Her mind, so sluggish and ready to take instructions before, had turned into something else. She was unsure if she knew what that thing was, but she was very sure that she never wanted to be in the vicinity of one who had willingly cast her in a subservient role for most of their life. Some friendships had to die so that some lives could begin. Tima never saw her home again. 30 years later, the floating palaces had 20 war kite squads of 6 equipped kinori each, patrolling in shifts to protect the floating palaces, or the parts of the floating palaces to which they were assigned. Internecine wars became a trend amongst the Bunion princesses. There were neither kinori nor apsaras left in the villages below. Her bare feet forgot the feel of grass and the sweet dampness of forest herbs. Some days she still saw the owl women. 1 or 2 of them would fly high enough that they reached the floating palaces before they would be swept away by the wind or captured by the war kite patrol units. Tima would see Admiral Sung Dao harnessed to her violet war kite more than once as she patrolled with her sisters, flying in stately aerial formations. Admiral Sung Dao's uniform was a rich lavender sonket, adorned with the silver accoutrements of her rank. She laughed as she worked, sounding far more light-hearted than the kinori who had grown up with Tima. Tima worked on the machines and propulsion satchels pioneered by Admiral Yonggyo at the Avian Defense Engineering Unit for civil engineering purposes, keeping their homes afloat and equipped with the wherewithal to stay protected and invisible. The kinori, on the other hand, worked on refining the war kites so that more kinori could be outfitted. Tima saw the kinori flying past her workshop on a daily basis, harnessed to their war kites. Tima was kept mostly to her workshop when she was not summoned to court for new directives from the next 2 empresses who came into power after the empress who had taken her in had been murdered in her sleep by her daughter's rivals. The war chariots of the past were never spoken of again. Arch-Admiral Young Yu had it ordered for the immediate destruction of any war chariot found in the ruins of the buried kingdom. The war chariots of the past were never spoken of again. Arch-Admiral Young Yu had ordered for the immediate destruction of any war chariot found in the ruins of the buried kingdom. They remained only to haunt Tima in her dreams and in her moonlight vigils against the demons of self-defeat. Thank you for spending this time listening to yet another podcast. We have 1 more left for the month of September, and I do hope you can come back and listen, should you so choose. And after that, a whole new slate of stories comes your way. So please join us for that. I do hope that you are well. I do hope that you are hanging in. And I do hope to see you soon. Until then, I bid you a very fond and warm, and hopefully very temporary, farewell.